Hey everybody, this is Rykard here again, and welcome to my first video talking about the new Pokemon games, Pokemon Sun and Moon, which are going to be coming out this November, which is very soon, and it's crazy to think about this for me at least, because I feel like X and Y just came out so recently, and now we're already getting a new Pokemon game, so that's also really cool, and obviously I'm sure a lot of you are occupying your time playing Pokemon Go for the time being. But today's video is just going to be a quick overview of some of the new Pokemon that have been released thus far. I'm going to talk about some just first impressions and speculation that I can, predict about a few of them as we kind of move forward, just to maybe get some ideas running through your heads and some ideas for me to think about as well. So let's flip it over to the Cerebi website, where we will take a look at all the new ones that are currently released as of today, which is July 26th. Alright, so starting off, we have our grass starter first, known as Rowlett. Obviously, like most starters, all three of these are probably going to have two further evolutions. But the cool thing about this guy is that we know right off the bat that it's a grass flying type, which is really cool considering the only other starter that has ever been dual typed is Bulbasaur. And it's been a very long time since that's happened, which is awesome and could give us kind of some speculation as to what this Pokemon might be able to do. Obviously, in-game, it could be your flyer, which is really cool, and people might pick it for that reason. But on the competitive side of things, because it's a flying type, we can just assume that it's going to have access to Roost, which is really cool. And because starters typically have some pretty good stats all around, have some decent bulk to them, it's very possible that this Pokemon could be some type of Pokemon to take hits and recover off health, or recover some of its health back up. Or just be like a fast attacker with access to a recovery move, similarly to how Latios and Latias are often used. Also being a flying type, it could get access to Defog, which is really cool, and could make this Pokemon a starter that's able to get rid of hazards, which is really unique to this guy. But we don't know if it's going to change typing as it evolves either, so there's a lot of speculation there. Furthermore, because the only two other grass Pokemon, or grass flying Pokemon that I can think of, at least off the top of my head, are Jumpluff and Tropius, there's actually kind of a precedent for both of those Pokemon not really being the best attackers in the world. They're typically seen as like support and also like defensive for both of them. Jumpluff is typically like a sub-seater. Tropius is just something to take hits really, and makes use of Citrus Berry with the harvest ability. But this guy could potentially get access to, Hurricane and Brave Bird and things like that to make it a powerful attacker, and like Leaf Storm and all sorts of things of that nature. So I'm actually very much looking forward to what this Pokemon is going to be able to do. And also gets a new move known as Leafage, which we're not exactly sure what it does yet. I'm thinking it's just like a basic grass type attack, kind of like Vine Whip. It could be a signature move of this Pokemon though, or something, but we'll kind of have to wait and see, or at least I don't see any information on this yet onto what exactly this thing does other than just attack the opponent. But moving on, we're going to take a look at Litton, which is the fire starter. It's just a fire cat Pokemon, pretty descriptive, right? And a lot of people have been speculating if it's going to evolve to become fire dark, potentially, because of just the way it looks right now. But knowing that it's a cat, very possible that this is like a fast sweeper, just because it looks like it could be that kind of quick Pokemon to do that. And also if it is, a dark type, potentially getting access to Pursuit and Sucker Punch and things like that to trap opponents. Obviously, we already have Houndoom as a fire dark type, but you don't typically see it too often, and it's just kind of a fast attacker, that has its own Mega Evolution. So I'm interested to see how they're going to make this Pokemon differ from Houndoom. And I'm very much looking forward to that, actually. So we'll see how it goes. But this one is probably the most straightforward in my mind as to what this is probably going to do, though I have no idea what it's going to evolve into. It could evolve into a really fat cat that's really slow and doesn't do anything. I have no idea. But it's just something to think about for right now. And then we have the water starter, which is Poplio. At least that's how I'm going to pronounce it. And this one's actually very interesting. So first of all, it is like having this weird mechanic, at least in the description of it, with its like balloons and stuff like that. And if you've ever seen any other pictures of this guy, it's like on like a beach ball or something, or I don't exactly know. But makes it very interesting. But also the other thing to keep in mind about this guy is that it has access to Disarming Voice, which is a fairy type move. And granted, there are a few other Pokemon that have access to this type of attack. But this could potentially become a water fairy, which would be really cool for a starter. We obviously only have a Azumarill for that right now. But also, if it is getting access to Disarming Voice and also Growl, as you can see there, it could potentially be going along with the sound type attack theme here, so it may get access to something like Boom Burst potentially. But we know as long as it doesn't evolve into Water Ice, it's going to get access to Scald, which is obviously amazing because that's just one of the best moves in the game. So you can't really go wrong there. So all three of these guys, I'm just curious as to what they're going to kind of become, but those are just kind of my speculations of the three of them, at least to start off with. But moving forward, we have probably what I think is the most interesting of all of the Pokemon that I've seen, at least for this new generation, which is Rockruff. And the main reason why I think this one is so interesting is because it is a Rock-type Pokemon that might actually be fast, which is like a first. Except for Aerodactyl and Archeops, we don't really have too many fast Rock-types. There's probably another one that I just left off there. But having a fast Rock-type attacker could be really awesome. And this Pokemon could be, the one to do it. Also, it gets access to Vital Spirit right now, which means it could be the perfect thing to switch in on like a predicted sleep move, which is really cool. But obviously, also we can anticipate that this Pokemon would have access to Stealth Rock and potentially be like a fast entry hazard Pokemon that's able to, sweep potentially. Maybe we'll get access to Rock Polish as well. There's a few things in mind, but also we know that it already gets Bite. So there's also the potential for it to get Crunch and Fire Fang and all those other Bite-type moves, potentially evolving into something with Strong Jaw. I don't know, but it's just something to think about. But I really like this one a lot. And even in the description here, it says it's really gutsy, which means it could potentially get the Guts ability too. So a lot of interesting things with this guy. I think it's probably the coolest looking one, and I'm very interested in seeing what it will evolve into. But then we have Kamala, I'm just going to pronounce it that way, which is, of all the Pokemon, the first one that has its own unique ability thus far, which is known as Comatose. And what this ability does is it makes it so that this Pokemon can only be inflicted by the sleep status, meaning that you will not have to worry about this thing getting burned, paralyzed, or poisoned, or anything else like that. Or maybe even frozen too. That'd be really cool to just have a Pokemon that can't get frozen like that. And it's just a regular normal type. And if anything is, tradition with Pokemon that look like they're asleep, they may evolve into something that is a lot more awake. If you think about like Slackoth to Vigoroth, a lot more of an awake Pokemon, potentially complete opposites when it evolves or something like that. Or it can just remain to be a sleepy normal type Pokemon, which to me means that you're wanting to use, moves like Rest with it and could potentially lead it to being bulky or something like that. It could also, evolve into getting a secondary typing. I can't really anticipate what that might be right now at this point in time. But this one seems really cool too, just to see what kind of other moves it might have access to. But we don't really have too much information on this guy yet, at least on Cerebi. But the fact that you can bring it in safely on status moves and also bring it in safely on Scalds and not have to worry about a burn is really cool, and something that I'm sure this Pokemon will definitely benefit from, since most normal types are physical attackers, and that's just kind of been a custom throughout the generations. There's a few exceptions to that, obviously, but most are physical attackers, so having a physical normal type that doesn't have to worry about getting burned is really cool. But then we have the bird, which is Pikachu. Again, gonna assume this thing evolves. But it has access to two abilities, which are Keen Eye, which is nothing to really consider to be that interesting, but also Skill Link. And this intrigues me a lot because there aren't a ton of moves that Skill Link really benefits from using. Like, you've seen, Mega Heracross with, Bullet Seed and Rock Blast and things like that, and, Cloyster with Icicle Spear and things like that. But as far as normal and flying type Pokemon, the only real move that they benefit from is like Fury Attack. So I'm wondering if this Pokemon is going to get some other type of multi-hitting move, potentially maybe even Tail Slap. But I'm very interested in to see how it's going to utilize this ability. And also just the fact that it's a Woodpecker. I'm going to assume it's also going to get Drill Run, which would be really cool. And means that it gets some decent type coverage there. And then again, another flying type, we can assume it's going to get Roost, potentially could get Defog, and may get access to, Brave Bird or Hurricane. We'll have to see. But I'm very intrigued by how it's going to make use of the Skill Link ability specifically. And then we have this interesting normal type called a Young Goose, which I guess it's not that old, it's young. But it has a new ability known as Stakeout, which, if I'm reading this correctly, says it deals twice the normal damage if the opponent just switched into battle, which is crazy to think about. Because if this Pokemon ends up being threatening in its own right, nothing is going to want to switch out on it because it's just going to do a ton of damage to whatever comes in. So this is actually really intriguing with this ability in itself. And I'm thinking, someone could just run like a Choice Banded set or a Choice Spec set. I don't know if it'll be a physical or a special attacker, and just spam their normal stab, and it'll just do a ton of damage if the opponent stays in, or if it switches out and do double the damage. So that's going to be an interesting ability. I can't tell yet if this Pokemon's going to evolve, because it does look kind of like a final form, but I'm just going to assume it does. Or at least I can vouch for it looking like a final form. But it also has access to Strong Jaw, which means it probably gets access to Crunch and Fire Fang and Ice Fang and all that kind of stuff like that, which is really cool too. So it's going to have some decent type coverage, at least in the Fang department. But another really cool, interesting Pokemon, or triplet of Pokemon, I know I'm talking stupid right now, but is the Bug-type evolution tree that's shown right here. So it's Grubbin going into Charge-a-Bug and then Vikavolt. And the cool thing about them is that they're Bug Electric, which is really awesome. We only have Galvantula for that, so getting a secondary version of this should be very cool. And also the middle evolution of it has access to an ability known as Battery, which, if I'm reading this correctly, says it increases the power of ally Pokemon's special moves, which is interesting to think about, because if you're using this Pokemon in doubles, wouldn't a Violite Charge-a-Bug be something that you might see potentially? Or are double battles going to be a more integrated part of the game campaign, possibly, like, with Pokemon Coliseum and things like that? So it's interesting to see what this Pokemon will be able to do with this ability, because it's a very unique ability for just a middle evolution to have. So I'm guessing something else would get it. I imagine, something like, what's it called? Electivire would, get Battery or something like that, but, who knows? But the final evolution of it is Vikavolt, which is Bug Electric, but it also gets Levitate, which is very cool. And judging by the look of it, it looks like it's going to be very fast. It also gets access to Zap Cannon, which is really cool. But it looks like it's going to be a very powerful attacker, and that's really cool, especially considering it has that immunity to ground-type moves, which is awesome. So I'm actually looking forward to seeing what this can do too. Potentially getting access to Mega Horn, Bug Buzz, Thunderbolt, all this stuff, and maybe even Volt Switch as well, most likely. And U-Turn, Volt Switch, and U-Turn. That would be really cool for having Stab on both. It could even have, good attack and special attack to be able to run both effectively. Who knows? But that's just something cool to think about. Next we have a dragon, a normal dragon type, actually. So they're kind of doing this whole dual typing thing to try to get every single type, encompassed in this new generation, I guess. Which is a very, very fun looking Pokemon, in my opinion. It has access to Sap Sipper, which is very cool, similar to Goodra, being a dragon type that gets access to that. But it also gets a new ability, similar to a couple of the other Pokemon as well, known as Berserk. And this ability increases the special attack of this Pokemon when it hits 50% of its health, which is very cool to think about that. So that's going to be interesting. It's probably just going to be one stage, but I could imagine just right off the bat running a substitute Slackberry set with this Pokemon, knowing that you're going to increase its power when it gets at a lower range of health and activating that. It's like a better version of Torrent or Blaze, where it's guaranteed at 50% as opposed to 33, and it's not just one type of attack, it's all of your attacks. So this Pokemon definitely could be something very powerful, though by the look of it, it doesn't look terribly fast. I could be completely wrong about, how that eventually turns out. But, having a very powerful dragon normal type sounds very cool. And really, depends how useful this Pokemon is depending on the coverage moves it gets. Is it going to get access to Fire Blast like so many Dragon types have? Or is it not going to get access to that like Haxorus? Is it going to get Earthquake? Things like that. So I'm kind of speculating kind of what this can do. But definitely a powerful offensive Pokemon with the Berserk ability, and then maybe some type of defensive set running Sap Sipper. Potentially, we'll see. But then we have Bruxish, and this thing is really cool too. It's a Water Psychic, which is similar to Starmie, meaning it's probably going to get access to Scald, which is really cool. Again, amazing move with a 30% chance to burn. But it has access to a new ability known as Dazzling. And what this ability does is, if I am finding this correctly, it prevents moves with an increased speed priority from hitting, meaning things like Fake Out and Extreme Speed and Quick Attack, things like that, aren't going to actually hurt this Pokemon with the Dazzling ability, which could be amazing for this Pokemon running an offensive set. And if you find a way to set up with it, potentially, I don't know how you would do it because we don't know really what moves this thing gets, but even just a Salackberry, it's going to be really fast, and then priority will not be able to take it out. So that's really cool. But it also gets access to Strongjaw, which is really cool as well. And because our Water Psychic that we know of Starmie, and obviously Slowbro and Slowking are all special attackers, and Strongjaw is typically reserved for physical attacks, we can get a Water Psychic Pokemon that is physical, which is really awesome. So definitely, potential access to, Crunch and aforementioned Jaw type moves that I've mentioned before. Maybe even Zen Headbutt on a physical set. So I'm very interested to see what this Pokemon gets as far as its move pool is concerned. And it's going to be very cool to use it, I think. And it just has a really funny design as well. Then we have Cutie Fly, which is a Bug Fairy, a new typing altogether. And it has access to Honey Gather, which is, I think, Combee's ability. And then also Shield Dust, which is an amazing ability that makes it so that secondary effects can't occur with certain attacks, which is very cool. Now, this thing is probably going to evolve, and I'm pretty sure it's like the tiniest Pokemon ever. It's like, what is it, it's not even 4, it is 4 inches tall. I guess Floette is smaller than that. But anyways, it's pretty small. It's Bug Fairy, which is very unique. So that means it's not going to match up too well against fire types, unfortunately. But it gets Fairy Wind, which means that this Pokemon could be a special attacker, could be, possibly physical. I don't really know. But being Bug, it might get access to Quiver Dance. That's something that I was thinking about for this Pokemon potentially, meaning that there's definitely like a boosting set, and having Quiver Dance with, Bug Buzz and Moonblast or something like that. It's very unique to this guy because not a lot of other bug types get access to fairy moves as far as I can remember from previous generations. So this thing is most likely going to evolve and be able to do some decent damage with that. So that's just kind of my thoughts on this so far. And then we have Pikachu for 7th gen, which is Togedemaru, which is an electric steel type. It's not Pikachu, obviously. But it has access to Iron Barbs, which is very interesting. And it looks like potentially really bulky. I don't know. We'll see if it evolves again, but it's the roly-poly Pokemon. We know it gets access to Discharge, and we know it gets access to Tackle. And it also has access to Lightning Rod, which is very cool, as well as a way for this Pokemon to potentially boost its special attack by switching in on an electric-type move. And being Steel as well could lead this Pokemon to getting access to Rock Polish, so potential sweeping ideas with that. Or it could be defensive. I really don't know with this guy yet. So I'm very curious as to see what's going to happen if it evolves. It just has a very funny design right now, and I love it. So we'll see. But having Iron Barbs and Lightning Rod is a very interesting combination of abilities, and I'll be looking to figure out a way to use both of them. Then we have Salandit, which has probably the most interesting new ability of all, which is known as Corrosion, which allows this Pokemon to poison types and steel types, which is previously not able to happen unless you use Soak and Toxic, which is a weird combination, and you don't really see that too often. But that makes this Pokemon very interesting. Also to mention, it is a Poison Fire type, which we have not gotten yet. So that is very cool to see. And will make, a very interesting attack combination for this guy in particular. It doesn't look terribly bulky right now could evolve into something like that, but to me it seems like it's going to be a special attacker, most likely. But having the ability to poison things makes me curious as if it only works with toxic, or if just poison moves in general will have the ability to poison. So for example, using Sludge Bomb against a poison type is the 30% chance to poison something with that actually going to work with Sludge Bomb, as opposed to just it only being useful with toxic. So that's actually kind of something I'm thinking about with that currently. I'm interested to see what other abilities this thing might get, but it might just have one signature ability in corrosion. I'm also wondering if it means that it, could hit steel types with poison moves as well, which is interesting, similarly to how, Scrappy lets normal types hit ghosts and fighting types as well. Then we have Beware, which I'm hoping is not the final evolution of this thing, because I don't want to call things Beware all the time. But anyways, it's a normal fighting type, which is cool, and it gets access to Fluffy and Klutz. Klutz, we know, allows you to pretty much ignore any items that you currently have, but Fluffy is a new ability which halves the damage taken from attacks that make direct contact, but in return it also doubles the damage taken from fire type moves. That's so random. Meaning that this Pokemon potentially is able to take physical hits really well, but is going to want to switch out for fire type attacks. That's so random, but it's interesting for sure. And being normal fighting gives access to some pretty sweet attacks. Probably going to be a physical Pokemon. We know it gets Hammer Arm, so that's really interesting. But yeah, I'm very interested to see how this ability gets used. It reminds me a lot of Furfrou when it first was introduced, and everyone was like, wow, it takes reduced damage from contact moves, and then it ended up really not being that useful as a Pokemon to take hits, which is unfortunate. But hopefully Fluffy is interesting for this Pokemon. Definitely interested to see how it plays out. But then we have the Ghost Fairy, which is called Mimikyu. I'm just going to call it that right now. Probably the Japanese name of it, or maybe it's the English name as well, but I'm not sure. But it is a Ghost Fairy, which we haven't gotten yet, and I think it's just funny how it wears a disguise, and that actually is its ability, which is an ability that makes it so that this Pokemon is able to escape damage from an enemy's attack one time, and then its appearance changes. Now, it doesn't state if this means that it's able to just take a free hit every time it switches in, or if it's just a one-time deal throughout the battle. So that's going to be really interesting to see. It's like its own little built-in focus sash, except it doesn't actually take damage with this ability. So you can even run it with a focus sash and potentially, just automatically be able to live 2 attacks no matter what, which is very cool. It has access to Slash, which I think is a very weird move for them to show us that it has access to, considering it's a Ghost Fairy. So that's actually particularly intriguing to me. I'm going to guess that it's a physical attacker just because of that. But this Pokemon definitely has some interesting strategy depending on how this ability works. So we will have to see as this game gets released. Next we have Whimpod, which is a bug water, and hopefully it evolves to also be a bug water, because we unfortunately don't have a fully evolved bug water type right now, because Surskit evolves into Masquerain, being a bug flying. So that'll be really cool. But it has an ability known as Wimp Out, which is very interesting, and I'm curious as to how this works. It's basically like Eject Button, but an ability. And you have to be below half of your health, so it'll run away once it gets hit below half of its health, which is something interesting to think about. Not sure if this is going to be the final evolution of this thing. As I said, hopefully it evolves and stays a bug water type. But I'm very curious as to how this thing will function, at least with this ability, if this becomes the ability that it has as its final evolution. It may have some interesting strategy behind that, so we'll see. Then we have Bounsweet, which is a grass type, and it has access to Leaf Guard and Oblivious. Two abilities that are not particularly interesting in themselves, that could lead to some interesting things with this Pokemon and what it does. I guess the main thing being that with Oblivious it can't be taunted, so that means that it will always be able to Leech Seed stuff, which is kind of cool. But it says it has bouncy movements and things like that. So it could end up becoming Grass Ferry, maybe even becoming, Grass Flying. I don't really know. Reminds me a lot of like Jumpluff, except it's bouncing instead of jumping. So we'll see how this Pokemon becomes interesting over the time. It's also the fruit Pokemon, which I find to be very interesting. So I'm assuming it might get access to Sweet Scent as well, and maybe other fruit-related moves if there are any. And I'm assuming maybe even Natural Gift, potentially, but we'll see. And then we have Comfey, which is a Fairy type. It's another really small Pokemon, I guess, because I guess all Fairy types are. But it has Flower Veil, which is the same ability that Florges has, and it also has another ability called Triage. What this does is it makes restorative moves gain the highest priority. Which I'm guessing means that if this Pokemon uses something like Recover, it's going to have increased priority on its moves, which is very interesting to think about. It's kind of similar to how Talonflame is able to roost with priority because of Gale Wings. So that might be really interesting to use with this Pokemon. Or at least that's what I'm reading here. And it might even just be across the board, potentially. So like a teammate could also get increased priority on recovery moves, or possibly even your opponents as well. So that could be bad. It could be kind of a double-edged sword, but we'll have to see. Then we have Mudsdale, which is a ground-type horse. And this thing just looks really sad in this picture. It just looks so upset. But we know it has a move called High Horsepower. And I'm not exactly sure what this does. I will look this up right now because I didn't anticipate this move. I didn't see this earlier when I looked at this. But it has an ability known as Stamina, which makes it so that this Pokemon's defense goes up by 1 when it is hit by an attack. And that is really intriguing because that means that it could potentially just get very bulky if things keep attacking it. Now, it doesn't specify if it is only contact moves or not. But it could just be moves in general, which could lead this Pokemon to potentially running a rest set that allows it to boost its defenses and then get up to full HP. So I'm wondering, how this will work. But I don't actually know what this move does right now, the High Horsepower. But if you could tell me what it does in the comments, that'd be wonderful. But also being a horse and ground, it could be a fast ground type, which again, like rock types, we don't have a terrible amount of like really fast, just regular ground types, which is really cool. And then we have the legendaries, the deity Pokemon, not DDD Pokemon, what am I talking about? And this one is probably the most interesting to me, at least, the electric fairy type, which has access to an ability known as Electric Surge, which brings the electric terrain field effect to the battlefield when it switches in. And again, we don't have this type prior to this Pokemon, aside from the Denny. So this is actually really cool, for me at least in particular. But then we have the other two, which we know a bit about. We have Solgaleo, and we also have Lunala, being a Psychic Steel and a Psychic Ghost type. The Psychic Steel Pokemon has Full Metal Body, which, to my knowledge, is the exact same thing as Clear Body. And then Lunala, Shadow Shield, is pretty much the exact same thing as Multiscale. So that's going to be really cool to use this Pokemon, probably in Ubers. And then we have the Steel Fairy, Magearna, which is going to be, the mythical Pokemon of the generation, so most likely having base 100 stats across the board like they typically do. But anyways, everybody, those are my initial impressions of these Pokemon right now. If you want to leave a comment and tell me what you think about some of them, potentially, I'd love to, create some time of discussion in the comments. But I know this was a little bit of a longer video, but hope you all enjoyed at least this review of what we've seen so far. And as always, everybody, take care, goodbye, and I will see you all